My D&D group are on the verge of swapping to the new updated 5e rules, and with this rules refresh we also got a brand new monster manual. Fresh looks at some classic D&D creatures with some new monsters to explore, and naturally I want them all. So today we'll be starting the journey of bit by bit creating miniatures for every creature in this book. But with so many awesome monsters contained in these pages, how am I going to choose where to start? To answer that, I've spent probably far too long putting every creature from this book into a randomizer wheel, so that of the almost 500 creatures in this book, we can randomly determine which one we're going to build, as well as keep track of which ones we are yet to make. So, without further ado, who's first?
Ooh, the Chimera, a classic. Alright, let's do it.
For this project, where possible, I want to select awesome minis that are as close to the new artwork as possible, so that when these hit the table, they are a near perfect reflection of the creatures contained in the book. And for the Chimera, we have plenty of great digital options. Violent and unpredictable, Chimeras combine the deadliest traits of lions, rams, and dragons. While greedy by nature of their draconic involvement, gathering small hordes of trinkets, treasures, and bones, a Chimera is a truly formidable foe. Attacking with breath, horns, and claws, driven by the sheer chaos of three conflicting minds, only a truly brave adventurer would seek out battle with a Chimera, and a wise one would seek to leave them well alone. And there we have it, our very first model. Now, not everything in this series will be 3D printed. If I have plastic kits or other models for the creatures we roll, I will use them, but today's models will all be printed up on my Bamboo Lab A1. This is a very delicate model, not intended for FDM machines, so there are a few areas that will need some cleaning up. The horns, for example, I decided to clip away and reprint to make sure their details got captured. When selecting minis, I'm not only looking at their artwork, I'm also taking into consideration their stat block. For the Chimera, its abilities are largely as expected. Keen senses and an innate ability for flight are paired with multiple attacks, making the most of all of its heads, able to use all three in a single flurry of attacks. To get this model ready for paint, I first came in with an all-over black prime, followed up by a base coat of fur brown. Then, once that was complete, I came in with a heavy zenithal of an off-white fur colour over everything except the wings. These base coats will help lay the groundwork for our paint job later, meaning that we won't have to go through and base coat the entire model by brush. And with those steps complete, I can now come in and start setting some various colours, tones, and values using some washes of thinned down speed paints, allowing me to get the more red fleshy areas where they need to be, and to add some further depth to areas like the wings and across the fur on the body of our lion. And of course, if you do want to know more about my actual process for 3D printing these minis on FDM machines, you can take a look at the playlist down in the description, or just have a look around the rest of the channel. All of my knowledge, tools, and processes are available here to help you print equally amazing miniatures if you're interested. With those base colours and tones down, I could now come in and add some details. This started with a dry brush on the wings, using a slightly more desaturated flesh tone. And then, once I was happy with that dry brushing, I came in with a regular brush, just using the same colour to help further push that contrast, layering it up gradually to get full coverage on the brightest areas. Then it was time for the fur, for which I decided to go for a hatchy highlighting style, to try and get down the soft texture of a lion's fur. And again, I built this up in layers, gradually adding lighter and lighter highlights to help further push the contrast across the model. I did end up deciding that this felt a little too desaturated, so came in with a brown-orange wash over the entire model, before once again coming back in and adding a few extra highlights just on the central focus points. Then I actually took a moment to look up some references of lions, using what I found to actually make this look more like a real animal, adding that black line around the mouth, connecting the nose to the mouth itself, and bringing in some much more vibrant oranges to make this feel a lot more realistic. Then it was simply a matter of picking out some of the other details, hitting the ram's horns with some layers of bone colours, slowly highlighting those up, and adding some details to the dragon, going for some black horns to further help push some separation in colour, and bringing in those vibrant red scales. I highlighted the horns up with some various grey tones, and hit the scales with some brighter reds, to really help them pop against the rest of the model. Looking to the rocky hilltop, caught between the flashes of lightning, standing proud and ready to fight, you see a chimera, its multiple heads regarding you as prey, and naturally looking for a fight. With the Chimera done, a classic fantasy monster, let's check out who is next up on the wheel.
The Minotaur of Baphomet. Let's have a read and see what we're building.
Finding a mini for this particular Minotaur was a little bit tricky. Looking around for Minotaur minis, most of them seem to have an excess of armour, and the more intelligent appearance of a humanoid Minotaur race, rather than what we're after, which is a more monstrous looking beast. I also wanted something that better reflected the new stat block. The Minotaur can gore a target if it runs in a straight line towards them, and has an abyssal glaive, giving it reach on its attacks. And although the mini I selected doesn't sport a glaive necessarily, a large enough axe should serve the same purpose. And besides, the rest of this mini is just too perfect to pass up. While most Minotaurs live free of the bonds of Baphomet, demon lord of beasts, there are those that serve him as his hulking brutes. These Minotaurs of Baphomet resemble the horned demon lord more so than others of their kind. They are known to lead their allies to hidden locations, or to stalk trespassers and adventurers. Much as in mythology, these creatures find station in mazes or labyrinthine dwellings, guarding possible secrets or treasures within their domain. This Minotaur model, sculpted using big shapes, made it the perfect candidate for FDM printing. I was able to pretty easily load up some automatic tree supports, just barely touching them up in the slicer, and it printed up amazingly. After getting all of the supports off this model, there was very little cleanup to actually do. All I really had to do was come in with a lighter to clean up a few of the FDM printing strings, and touch up just a few of the areas with some sanding files and a hobby knife. Once again, to get this ready for painting, I hit the model with an all-over black prime. But rather than the lighter tone that we put on our Chimera, we instead went for a much darker oak brown to base coat this model. I then highlighted this up with some various flesh tones, so that the muscles of our creature were basically ready for highlights. And all of the furs, much like with the Chimera, would be able to be hit with some washes of thin speed paint. Speaking of which, I used some browns to establish the tone and colour of the fur across this model, coming in with a few layers of this to darken it down and allow us to add some highlights again later. I did choose to vary up the browns a little bit with some of the different areas of texture. The areas that are more like hair on this model, for example, I made a little bit darker than the rest of the fur, just to help separate a few of these areas. For his loincloth, I ditched the speed paints and came in with some regular acrylics, just to really lay down a foundation of a dark brown, as this would end up being highlighted more like a dark leather than the fur on the rest of the model. Much like with our ram's horns on the Chimera, I started with a dark brown, moving up to a more mustard yellow, and eventually highlighting up with some various bone colours, pushing all the way up to a very bright bleached bone. For the skin tones, I highlighted these up to be brighter than the furs, but still kept them relatively muted. The majority of the flesh tones were highlighted up to a buffed hide, with just a few spot highlights of some Dorado skin, to again help push contrast on this paint job. Then I turned my attention back to the furs, using a desaturated grey-brown on the majority of this creature's hide, and then coming in with some slightly richer, warmer tones on the actual hair. And of course, to make this creature truly menacing, I came in with some bright reds on the eyes. Moving back to that loincloth we mentioned earlier, I used a very similar hatching technique that we saw on the Chimera, but rather than running the lines in the direction of fur, these were a bit more sporadic, giving the look of a worn old leather. Then it was time for some finishing details. A metallic base coat and dark wash on the axe, followed by some washes all over the base, and finally some grey dry brushing, to make it look like our Minotaur is crouched on some ancient ruins. As you continue to walk the ancient ruins, something starts to feel off. The structures, the pathways, it's almost like you're moving through a maze. As the realization hits you rounding a corner, you can see it. Crouched and ready to charge, a Minotaur of Baphomet staring down its next target. And for our third and final creature of the day, we have
A stone giant. Alright, let's add another one to my collection.
For the stone giant, I do already have a miniature from back in my resin printing days, but he was painted up in a hurry, and I don't think that stone giants are very solitary creatures. So today, I reckon we'll print him up a friend, then spruce them both up with a slightly nicer coat of paint, and some brand new bases. The bases that I'm using for these stone giants here today are the Crystal Caverns, a set of FDM-friendly bases currently available over on the Painted for Combat Patreon, where you can also find our Patreon exclusive Discord, my 3D printing profiles, and more. So whether you're into 3D printing yourself or just want to help support the channel, consider checking out the Patreon. It truly is all of the support over there that allows me to keep making videos like this, so thank you so much to everyone who checks that out. Alright, back to it. Stone giants have rugged features, with patterns and hues similar to the rock common near their homes, allowing them to easily blend in with their stony surroundings. With a curiosity for the natural world and its ancient wonders, these stone giants will likely only meddle with those who threaten these sites of natural significance, staying out of the affairs of others wherever possible. But, should combat be necessary, their sheer size and knowledge of their surroundings would make them terrifying foes indeed. The model I already had in my collection nicely reflects the Giant's Club attack option found in the stat block, so when selecting him a friend from the same line of models, I decided to choose one that reflected a different weapon option available to the Giant, a boulder. A rather fitting weapon, I would say, given a stone giant's usual rocky surroundings. For painting this model, I first came in with some various mottled speed paints across all of the skin and rock. Most of this will entirely disappear after a few washes and dry brushes, but in the few areas it does remain, it will just add a little bit of interest to the skin tone, reflecting that idea of the patterning that we often see on stone giants. After an initial dark wash, I then came in with a second layer of some thinned down dark speed paint, just to really darken down these areas, so that when we dry brush them up later, there's a good amount of contrast, without us having to push these rocky colours too bright. And even though all of those yellows, blues and browns that we added under the skin have disappeared at this point, they do add a nice little bit of interest in the areas where they are poking through. Next up, it was time for some speed paints on the furs, just to get down the initial colours, values and tones on these areas, before coming in with some dry brushing to add some highlights. Moving up from our speed paint, through some fur brown, and eventually up to some highlights of buffed hide, very similar to our Minotaur. Then, base coating a few other areas across this model, some grey for the hair, a fully opaque layer of brown on the various wooden elements, and two different browns across the base coats on the leathers, to add some variation in their base coats. I decided to push the highlights on the skin a little bit further than our dry brushing had allowed, just mixing in a little bit more white to those greys. And then, using some of those same greys, highlighted up the hair. The rest of the various elements across this mini use some very similar techniques to what we've used on the other two models, highlighting up the bone from a dark brown up to that mustard yellow, and finally adding in a bone highlight, and adding in the hatchy highlights across all of our leathers. For the lighter areas, working up through some desaturated brown greys, and for the darker leathers, moving up through fur brown all the way to buffed hide. For the wood, to help add some separation to the model, I used a desaturated brown here as well. And for some of the other areas, just adding a wash to add a little bit of depth to those parts. And after slathering the bases with an all-over black wash, I came in with some highlights of greys, to get a stony looking ground that matched the skin of our stone giants. Continuing your trek through the mountain valley, cliffs of stone on either side of your path, you see a shape move against the rock in the distance. The size of a building, but moving with grace. The milky white eyes of a stone giant turn and regard your presence. This journey could have just gotten a lot more precarious. And there we have it, our first updated minis for the new Monster Manual, the Chimera, Minotaur of Baphomet, and the Stone Giants. This project was such a blast, getting to actually print up a bunch of minis that I will use on the table, and spending a good amount of time painting them up to a level that I am happy with. Let me know down below what you thought of this video, any improvements you suggest for future videos in this series, and what creatures you're excited to see me make for the new Monster Manual. But for now, that does bring us to the end of this video. Like if you liked, subscribe to stay up to date with my FDM and tabletop projects, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, have a good one.